everyone. My name is David. Welcome to churches number 12, 13, 14, and 15 of 52 churches in 52 weeks, round 3. If you're new to the channel, this is a one-year spiritual journey as we understand and explore a wide variety of different churches. If you're a returning subscriber, you're probably wondering, David, what's happening? Why are you doing a video with 4 churches in a single one? Well, that's because for this video, we're going to be taking a look at a rather interesting intersection of religious history in a little town called Palmyra, New York. Now, if you're a Latter-day Saint, you have probably heard about Palmyra your entire life. When it comes to Joseph Smith, the Sacred Grove, the First Vision, Golden Plates, the first publication of the Book of Mormon, all of that happened in Palmyra. And I will touch on that much more in the next video. But for this particular one, we're going to take a look at what is a rather unusual setting when it comes to Palmyra, because it features 4 different churches from 4 different denominations, all dotting their steeples on the same corners of the very same intersection. So it's been nicknamed the Four Corners Churches, or God's Corners. And the 4 neighboring churches consist of Zion Episcopal Church, Western Presbyterian Church, Canal Town Community Church, which formerly was First Baptist Church of Palmyra, and what used to be the First United Methodist Church of Palmyra, which closed in June 2019, but recently there's a new church that is operating there called City of God World Prayer Center. So this intersection is quite well renowned, especially when Ripley's Believe It or Not featured Palmyra in 1938. And at that time, Ripley's readership was worldwide, with thousands, if not maybe millions of readers taking a look into this. So with Palmyra and the Four Corners churches, it kind of shows the religious diversity in this small town since its very early days. With this third round of 52 churches in 52 weeks, I've been trying to find a balance between, with this channel, exploring a wide variety of different churches, while also trying to attend sacrament meeting as often as possible as a recent convert into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, while also trying to unite and build some bridges between different types of faiths by finding a common cause. So with this third round of 52 churches in 52 weeks, we're doing the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital fundraiser. What this fundraiser does is it helps donate money for families who are struggling as their children battle catastrophic type of diseases. So already, as of this recording, we've raised $15,000. We are on pace. Our goal by the 52nd church is to have raised $52,000. So again, for everyone that has helped donate or said some prayers, I want to say thank you very much as we continue on with this fundraising journey. This Sunday visit checked all the boxes. I wanted to get a tiny, small glimpse of what a young Joseph Smith might have been influenced by when he lived in Palmyra, and just to see the religious excitement and diversity when he was growing up. So my goal for this Sunday was to visit all 4 of the Four Corners churches in Palmyra. Here's the tricky thing though. When I make my church visits, my number one priority is I'm there to worship. At the same time, I want to be attending my local ward as often as possible. So I figured, well, maybe if I can do 4 church visits within the same morning, and then I later found out Palmyra actually had a sacrament meeting with a YSA group later on. So again, this was able to kind of fit everything that I was looking for in one weekend. Well, when I was researching the Four Corners churches, I found 2 of them started at 10 a.m. A third one, I couldn't find any start time online. And then the 4th one, I was getting conflicting information because I saw one site that said it was at 9:30 in the morning. And then another Google search said that the church was permanently closed. So I'm like, all right, you know what? I'm just going to show up at 9:30 and kind of get a feel for what's going on. So I was able to walk in all 4 of the churches, And then I also got to meet some members before and after service and learn a little bit more history of some of the churches. So I'll show a little bit about what each church looked like and sounded like inside, and I'll expand on more in just a few moments.
verses up, but Leviticus 25, verses 44 through 46 says, this is giving commands from God to his people. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some from the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they become your property. You can will them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly.
Since making these church visits, as I've been researching, I have found Palmyra to have such a unique backstory behind it. So it was founded by John Swift and was called Swift's Landing up until about 1795 or 1796, when it changed its name to Palmyra to reportedly impress a school teacher. That seems so far-fetched. But Palmyra, it was named after the Syrian city called Palmyra, or a fortress of palms in Syria. So apparently this was an oasis on a trade route in the desert and was an ancient city that was built by King Solomon. Well, fast forward to Palmyra, New York, about the 1820s. This is when the Erie Canal started to be built. And with the canal being built, there was a lot more traffic, a lot more transportation of people coming to and fro. So as a result, you had a lot of religious enthusiasm and excitement with several revivals and camp meetings going on. So you had Presbyterians, you had Methodists, you had Baptists, you had Episcopals, all diverging on this area. So as a result, you had a number of congregations being formed. But then also, 1820, you have Joseph Smith and his family. They're trying to figure out the right church to go to, and as a result, Palmyra becomes the birthplace for the Latter-day Saint movement. One interesting thing, when I was talking with some locals, I spoke with one gentleman, and I didn't get much kickback regarding Latter-day Saints in this area, but what this one gentleman mentioned was Palmyra, or at least nearby with Rochester, in the same Wayne County, was the birthplace of spiritualism. So he was telling me something about the Fox sisters. So in the late 19th century, these three sisters, they knew how to click their toes to make sounds, or as they called it, rappings. So these sisters acted as mediums and essentially would just, rip people off by saying that they were able to communicate with ancestors, in the spirit realm. So they would click their toes, and, the person on the other side of the table doesn't know where this is coming from. They're just getting this word that it's an ancestor trying to communicate from the other side. So again, this is where Palmyra and Wayne County, just so much history on what was happening in the 19th century, because there was just so much with all the Protestant churches, the Latter-day Saint movement, and then you even had something like this with the spiritualism movement. So for this particular Sunday, the very first church that I walked into was what used to be the First United Methodist Church of Palmyra. So in the 1700s to the 1800s, the Methodists were very well known for having circuit riders, or also known as horse preachers. So the clergy would go on horseback and they would travel all kinds of insane distances by horse to preach, but then also to kind of create and organize congregations in these towns. So in 1797 was when the Methodist Church in Palmyra was organized. And from what I was reading, it sounded like in those early days, before cars were around, they would have one member who would travel by sleigh in the winter months. And it was almost kind of like a bus. So he would go around town, and then ladies, children, and then some of the men would kind of jump on the sleigh itself, and then they would kind of bring along the kids and the ladies who were on sleds. So this big sleigh that was, horse-driven would take about 30 people at a time, drop them all off at the church, and then this one member on the sleigh would go back into town and grab another 30 people or so. So just that old school, old-fashioned type of church setting. Just, I heard that story and it just was like, man, that would be fun to go back to. So eventually, about 1866, the church was the very last one to be a part of the Four Corners at this intersection. And I guess with the building, when they were about to dedicate it, I guess it would cost about $26,000, but they needed another $7,000 to raise to be debt-free. So they had about a 3-day rally and were able to raise enough funds so when they opened the church, they didn't have any debt at all. Well, over the decades, membership continued to dwindle, and by 2018, they only had 10 members left. So they had a vote. I guess 9 out of the 10 decided to close the church, and it officially closed in July 2019. So when I was researching, again, I don't do a whole lot of research because I just want to go attend and try not to create any biases. So the only things that I had done is I had done some online researching just to figure out what the hours were at all 4 churches. So I did a Google search. I think it was First United Methodist Church, Palmyra, and I saw Google said it was closed, but then I saw a few Facebook pages where it said it opened at 9:30. And I think looking back, that probably was a Methodist church in Palmyra, Pennsylvania. So when I arrived at 9:30 in the morning, I walked in and there was nobody there. So I was just kind of like the door was open on the side. So I walked around, you can see, they had a beautiful organ in the back. And then they had a lot of wooden pews with some royal blue cushioning inside. Still looked like it was in operation, but obviously at 9:30, there was no church service happening at that time. I walked outside later and I saw that they had a sign saying City of God World Prayer Center. And then they also had a sign that said Welcome Moss Family. So with the City of God sign, I saw that Sunday services were at 6 p.m. Apparently this church started just about a year ago. And, with no church going on, I couldn't stay around long enough for 6 p.m. So I attended the second church of the Four Corners. But afterwards, I did a little bit more research on this church, and I learned that portions of the church building are now used as an Airbnb. So looking at some of the reviews, apparently all the reviewers love Richard, I guess, who kind of sets this Airbnb up. Just amazing reviews, 5-star reviews all over the place for him. And looking at a few other articles with City of God, it sounds like this new church, it sounded like they may be Pentecostal, but they rent out the church building. So to see that there is still a church being operated as a Four Corners churches, even though it may not be Methodist anymore, is kind of good to see. The second church that I visited was Western Presbyterian Church, right across the street. And this church has so much history behind it. And just due to the scope of this video, trying to cover 4 different churches in one, I'm just going to try and get to the Reader's Digest version of it. But if you're a Latter-day Saint, you may be aware of this church. In the 1820s, Joseph Smith's family, namely his mother, Hiram Smith, and Samuel Smith, were reportedly members of this church when it met in a Presbyterian meeting house. It wasn't a church at that point. This was actually a town hall that was owned by the city, but it was built by the Presbyterians, so they named it after the Presbyterians. Well, in 1823, the eldest Smith son, Elvin, died. And reportedly, the Reverend Benjamin Stockton told the Smith family that Elvin had gone to hell because he wasn't a member of that church, which obviously had some type of influence on a young Joseph Smith and the Smith family as a whole. This church was dedicated in 1817, and it sounds like the current building was built in about 1834. So when I tried to walk in the front doors, those were locked. I saw a number of members were parking towards the back, so I went back there, walked in, and I went up a staircase, but the door was locked. Apparently it was a fire exit. So I walked back downstairs, met a gentleman with his wife who were absolutely fantastic, and they helped guide me, and the gentleman kind of gave me a little quick tour of the church and behind the scenes. So he was showing me, and one thing that stood out as I was walking in was just how white it was, and just the amount of wood. Also, the organ. This organ was amazing. So the gentleman showed me and actually let me ring the bell behind the scenes. And he took me to this one area that kind of laid out the importance of what they did to build this church with wood and all the wood pinings and the hatchets that were used, and how they're able to orchestrate and build this church the way it stands today. So he kind of mentioned a little bit more about the organ. So apparently the organ, it was built in 1856, and he told me it cost $1 million. And when the organ was first used, I guess they had to have someone basically hand pump it, I should say. So this guy would hand pump the organ so it could make all the noises that it needed to do. So apparently now it's a 5 horsepower, 3 motor phase type of organ. And I guess it took over 11,000 hours to build. So again, I'm not an expert on organs, but just hearing some of those numbers, I can't wrap my head around it. Eventually, he brought me outside and he showed me a rather unique plaque. So it said in 1849, Clarissa Hall and Leonard Jerome, the grandparents of Sir Winston Churchill, were married in this church. So to have this, so again, there's no mention of the Smith family here, but to have a tie to Sir Winston Churchill just kind of blew my mind when I was visiting this. So I attended the first part of the church, and just a basic type of Presbyterian liturgy, nothing to talk too much about, but a young man played the organ, and as you can see just with the earlier portion of this video, that organ just sounds amazing. And there's a lot of pride in that organ and how that has been kind of passed through the generations for this church. The third church that I walked into was what formerly was the First Baptist Church of Palmyra. And from what it sounds like over the past decade, there's been a number of closings and reopenings. And the most recent reopening, they've been called the Canal Town Community Church. So in 1835, this church was organized due to a church split. One congregation got to keep the building and records, while the other congregation, First Baptist Church, got to keep the name. So they decided to build a new church right on the Four Corners intersection, and they erected it in 1841. My guess, potentially, is the reason that there may have been a church split is because this church was very, very passionate against slavery. And they had a big resolution meeting in 1845 discussing how they couldn't be in association with another Baptist group who were slaveholders and slave owners. So eventually this church, I guess even with the Civil War, they had 27 church members who joined to enlist during that time. Well, in 1870, the church unfortunately burned down, and in 1871, they had to build a new one up. So when I walked in, I walked in maybe about 30 minutes into the church service. It looks like there were about 12 people in attendance. At the very front, they had a number of contemporary music items, but during about the 15 or 20 minutes that I was inside, I just heard a sermon. And coincidentally, it was about slavery, going into Leviticus 25, and the Israelites look into slavery, and then the pastor was kind of talking about some of the American early history in regards to slavery. So unfortunately, just due to the lack of time that I was in this church, I really can't do justice to talk much about this one, but at least want to acknowledge it as one of the 4 churches that I visited. The final church I walked into was Zion Episcopal Church, and wow, this one was a gem to learn about. I've mentioned in a previous video how I've become fond of Episcopal churches, and that's mainly due to the way that the church preaches through its church building and its architecture. And this was the case here as well. And I think to me, it just serves as a testament to those who came before and how they implemented their talents and their faith together to make something absolutely marvelous and spectacular. With this particular one, the Reverend from 1872 built this church in a year with volunteers that he was having stay, I guess, like in the attic and feeding them. And to see how this has been so incredibly well maintained for 150 years, like you can even see to this day just how loved and cared for the congregation has for its church building. So when I walked in, unknown to me at the tail end of the service, coincidentally, I landed in pew number 52. So on the East Coast, you had a number of churches where they would number all the pews as a pew tax. So if you were a member, you would pay for your pew. So one interesting thing as I was attending at the end of the service was then communion came up. And just due to myself now becoming a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where sacrament consists of water and bread, no wine, when communion was going on, I didn't know if I should come up because I didn't know if they were going to be serving wine or grape juice. So here, as I'm in my conversion process, that was one thing that was a strange kind of hit as I was kind of contemplating what to do when they were inviting me to the table for the Lord's Supper. Just was a different type of feeling. But after the service, I got talking to a couple members, and I was introduced to this fantastic lady who apparently has grown up in the church since she was a child. So she gave me a little bit of an impromptu tour to learn a little bit about this. So it sounds like the congregation formed in about 1904 on frontier lands. And eventually they decided to build a church in about 1823 at the Four Corners spots. So I think it was Bishop Henry Hobart who kind of orchestrated the first church. And over time, this congregation sounds like they outgrew that. And then came Reverend John Webster. He is attributed to pretty much crafting and building the church as it stands today. So again, he was not only was he a pastor, but he was a very skilled carpenter and craftsman. And you can see his handiwork all over the church. So as he got working on this building, he was inviting volunteers and townspeople, housing them in his attic and feeding them as they worked on the church. A couple different things that my guide showed me was just, again, some of the smaller details. One thing that she showed me was one of the collection plates that he made. And you can just see just these fine details and the craftsmanship and the colors that were used. You just don't see that type of detail in any type of collection plates nowadays. On top of that, the very front with the altar, you have these pictures of these like female angels. And I was told that these were actually painted by Reverend John Webster's daughter. And I'm looking at these pictures, I'm like, these are amazing. It's like his daughter should have been painting, the Mona Lisa or something. These were just so well made. On top of that, she was telling me that the shingles, when they first started making this, 150 years ago, they had to redo the roof. And when they were taking apart the shingles, they were finding initials on the bottoms of the shingles that the workers from 150 years ago had actually done. So when they were redoing the roof, church members were actually putting their initials on, just kind of as like a little salute for the next members who might have to redo the roof, in maybe another 150 years. Who knows? Hope you enjoyed this rather unique look into the Four Corners churches in Palmyra, New York. In our next video, I'm going to take a look at the Latter-day Saint side of Palmyra by taking a look at a number of historical sites, including Hill Cumorah, the Sacred Grove, the Smith family farm, in addition to the Book of Mormon, where the first publication was, and also attended a sacrament meeting, so this one will be jam-packed with information. As always, if you want to stay tuned, make sure to like and subscribe. But until next time, hope you have a good one.